Now, without any further delay, I'd like to turn today's program over to your presenter, Jason Noble.
Thanks, Mike. Welcome to today's webcast on Office Canvas. What we're going to do is we're going to cover a few different concepts first. We'll talk about SharePoint's business value. We'll also introduce this concept of enterprise SharePoint or enterprise software architecture, and this isn't a new concept. It's just something that we want to start moving into the SharePoint development land. And then we're going to talk about how SharePoint can actually be considered an enterprise software architecture, and then talk about how Office Canvas helps to fill some of the gaps in the vision of SharePoint. So first and foremost, we like to just introduce the types of solutions that our customers are leveraging SharePoint for. Obviously, things like team collaboration, that's kind of the default what does SharePoint do type answer. Also, intranets is obviously very, very popular. The displaying of corporate information, doing employee directories, kind of the kicking off of processes that are employee-specific. Also, extranets. The difference between an intranet and an extranet is one of authentication. Obviously, you know who your vendor is, who your partner is, but really it's all about self-service for vendors, customers, and partners. Public-facing webs, yet another strong application of SharePoint, primarily for its web content management and authoring capabilities. Also, traditional document management, so kind of the advancing of your traditional file share type infrastructure. So adding things like search and versioning and records management capability on top of what was traditionally a static or just a simple file share. Then we get into enterprise applications, and this is the one that we'll drill into very deep. But one that I wanted to touch on was obviously search. So SharePoint is a fantastic search platform that can be leveraged for a complete enterprise search offering that crosses multiple systems, multiple file shares, Exchange, websites. So again, a single place for all of your search needs. So going back to the enterprise applications, knowing that SharePoint does all of these things kind of surrounding enterprise applications is important, and that's kind of the stuff that it does out of the box, if you will. That's not to say that there aren't customizations in each one of these boxes, but that's just to say that this is its primary vision. But when you start talking about enterprise applications, you're starting to talk about things that are more mission critical in terms of business processes that are actually kicked off and managed within SharePoint itself. So things like controlling how projects are initiated and governed, controlling how an individual is onboarded into an organization, ensuring that the correct paperwork is filled out, ensuring that a cell phone has been provided to that individual, and managing all of that human interaction that can occur. Traditionally, these types of solutions are document-centric or digital asset rich, meaning that they're usually around the collection of documents and the validation of documents or other types of digital assets, but a document is very, very common. So if we start to look at all of those different types of capabilities that we have available to us in SharePoint, we can also start to make some assessments in terms of, well, how long do these things take and how much customization is required of SharePoint to make an enterprise class rollout of these different capabilities. So with basic collaboration, you can say that the customization is very, very low. That's not to say that things like governance and a solid infrastructure are not important, but really what we've seen our customers do is roll out collaboration in its most basic form, not customizing the UI, giving the end users the ability to create team sites and meeting workplaces or workspaces, creating wiki sites and blogs, kind of that out-of-the-box default capability. Again, customizations are very low. Maybe you'll create a provisioning wizard, but again, those customizations are low, and the implementation time is very short. So moving into some of the other solution areas, things like document management, you might have some customizations around workflow, but the vast majority of the effort is done in analysis and ensuring that you have things like content types and document templates correctly analyzed for a particular organization, but there's not a lot of code that you're going to write for that particular solution. When you get into enterprise search, what you'll traditionally do will be kind of customizing the look and feel and how results come back and how they're presented to the user. We have seen some introduction of some third-party products to enhance it so that you have some document previewing capabilities. And then finally, in intranet is something that you will do customizations, but if implemented correctly, SharePoint provides the vast majority of the technical capabilities required to implement an intranet. That's not to say that you won't customize the user experience through either master pages or page layouts or some combination of the two. So the vast majority of the customization effort is usually in styling. Now moving over into the public-facing websites, again, the time frame to implement public-facing websites is obviously longer than the things that are out of the box, simply because of the fact that every website is unique. The requirements for every website is unique, and the level of customization, if you were just doing a publishing portal or a publishing website, the ability to create pages, the customization is actually very low. If you're doing things like multilingual translations and you want some form of an integration, you're going to have to create a translation workflow. So there is some customization, but the duration of these projects and implementations are traditionally very long. Now we get into enterprise SharePoint applications, back to that concept. And these are, again, those applications that are real line of business applications that automate very specific processes that are outside of your traditional ERP system or your traditional finance system, things like onboarding, things like project initiation. We've even done things like medical records routing. So again, all those processes that are outside your core business systems, but they still need to have some rigor and some thought put around how they're executed. So you can see that the level of customization goes up significantly, meaning you're very far from out-of-the-box capability, and your duration goes up. Now, this is to say that these enterprise SharePoint apps are being developed in a professional manner, meeting the requirements of what's known as enterprise software architecture that we'll drill into in a minute. So that's why these go up. Now, why is that? If SharePoint is an application development platform, why do these things take so long? So that's really what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to talk about how Office Canvas will significantly decrease both the risk and the level and the time frame, as well as the level of required customization to really implement true enterprise class applications on top of SharePoint. So let's go into a definition of what enterprise software architecture is, and this is straight from Wikipedia, but what it basically states is that there is consistency in both the design and the implementation across like applications. So traditionally, SharePoint applications, again, are very much focused on the services that SharePoint provides as a technology, such as a document repository with versioning, with the ability to have recycle bins, so all those nice things that you get with SharePoint. These are the types of applications that you would traditionally create. Now, that's not to say that you cannot do transactional-based systems, but there are some limitations in the architecture of SharePoint that we can overcome, but they're to be noted. So again, enterprise software architecture just states that there's consistency in both design and implementation across applications. So some of the key characteristics or the anatomy of an enterprise software application would be that it provides consistent implementation of data structures, so how things are stored, the formats, the data types, what drop-downs are available, maybe not necessarily what drop-downs in the data structure, that's more of a UI thing. But again, how data is stored, just think database. Interfaces between applications, so how do we leverage external applications inside of this enterprise software architecture? What's the protocol by which we communicate? Also, the ability to create consistent user interfaces. If you look at the very large software products, the SAPs, the Siebels, what that is they have an architecture, a very significant enterprise software architecture that allows you to do user interface customizations without writing code some of the time. A lot of the times you do have to go in and actually write code to make these things happen, but the ideal vision is to get to a point where you configure user interfaces as well as business processes. And obviously for an enterprise software architecture, we want to concern ourselves with hardware. And going back to how this actually affects the SharePoint world, you can see that SharePoint actually provides a lot of these things. And when we talk about hardware, we know that SharePoint supports this thing called a farm, in which it is aware of all of the physical assets that are in use to meet the user's requests. Also, another important component is the deployment process. The deployment needs to be absolutely predictable and repeatable. So these are all, very important aspects of an enterprise software architecture. So now, some other characteristics that we need to concern ourselves with when we're talking about developing these apps is the ability to version your apps, the ability to deploy these apps. The term is 99 environments and 99 successes. The thing to note there, obviously, is that there's minimum patching on each one of those environments, but we want to ensure that if we deploy our software, it behaves in an extremely consistent manner. Also, the ability to patch and upgrade solutions that are in flight or in production is critical. Systems that are extremely configurable, so we should have the ability to alter the system's behavior without going in and changing code. So again, these are all characteristics of enterprise-class software that we're trying to build into SharePoint. Now let's talk about how each one of those characteristics or those individual items is actually realized within SharePoint itself. So when we're talking about consistent data structures, what we're talking about are content types, fields, and lists. And there's a ton of documentation out on MSDN about these specific concepts. But if you're not familiar with these are really core tenets and kind of the keystone of what SharePoint is. So how data is stored within within SharePoint. Also interfaces, meaning how do we respond to if a content type is added or an item is added to a list? What's the mechanism by which we can actually act on that data? And that obviously comes in the form of event handlers and receivers. Around the concepts of user interface and user interface design, the tools that are provided are obviously ASP.NET forms. Because SharePoint is just simply an ASP.NET app, we can host a series of different types of ASP forms within SharePoint. That's not to say that there isn't a recommended pattern or approach that you should use to implementing the ASP.NET forms, but you can host traditional ASP.NET forms within SharePoint. Also, InfoPath is one of those tools that is often considered when developing custom UIs for SharePoint. We'll talk about some of the details on that. For business process automation, meaning the creation, the interaction, controlling the interaction of users of the system, the tool set that's provided is Windows Workflow Foundation. And essentially you have, as you probably know, a couple options in terms of authoring these workflows, and we're going to drill into the specifics a little bit later. For a deployment process, SharePoint provides a solution framework, which again allows you to roll out versioned components in a very controlled manner. It manages the propagation of those software assets to the various entities in the farm where needed, and it manages the ability to, again, deploy those components, roll back those deployments, have scripting to deploy assemblies, et cetera, et cetera. So, here are all of the capabilities that SharePoint provides in terms of enterprise-class software. So then, if it provides all of these capabilities, then why do the creation of these enterprise SharePoint applications take so long? And that's really one of the things that we're going to address here, and hopefully at the end of this you'll see how Office Canvas decreases some of that effort. So let's drill into, again, the specifics of some of the challenges around creating these ESAs inside of SharePoint. So first of all, the modeling of data could be considered challenging. That's not to say that going into SharePoint itself and creating content types and all that good stuff is not easy. It's just a matter of meeting the other characteristics of enterprise software, such as deployability, that become challenging. Also, the authoring of workflow is difficult. There are tools out there, some provided by Microsoft. We'll drill into those in a little bit. Also, the authoring of these things called features, meaning the deployable units, is often difficult. The out-of-the-box user interface services are really not sufficient. So if you look at the list interface for SharePoint, it allows you to do very, very basic column-based user experiences. You really have no control over what fields are shown. You have no control over the ability to pull in related information from other lists. So really the out-of-the-box user interface services are insufficient. Also, scalability limits. I'm sure that several of you have heard of the 2,000 items per list, X number of subwebs per site collection. So there are some real scalability limits that we need to concern ourselves with when we're designing and architecting these solutions. Also, the ability to upgrade in-flight applications is very challenging in terms of the ability to deploy features that act on existing sites. Let's say moving out new pieces of information and ensuring that any configurations are left intact. So again, the management of these applications becomes challenging. So what are the tools, kind of the de facto tools that are used to create these types of applications? First and foremost, SharePoint itself you can obviously use to create relationships between lists and create content types, all with the understanding that the best chance that you have for reuse and deployability is to save the site as a site template, which has some challenges in itself. So again, you do have flexibility in SharePoint or creating apps on top of SharePoint just using point-and-click interface, but reusing those and really adding a level of sophistication to those is challenging. So you also have SharePoint Designer. The expectation is that you know ASP.NET to a certain extent, provides some good capabilities for data view web parts. But again, the challenge becomes here in, are you developing enterprise class software, or are you developing just a one-off solution? And usually what you're doing is you're developing a one-off solution that really doesn't take into consideration the fact that traditional enterprises have development environments, staging environments, and production environments that you need to have predictability in the deployment process across those. So again, there's some challenges there. And then of course Visual Studio is our absolute best option for creating these solutions, and quite honestly that's the one that Neudesic uses heavily and depends on day in and day out. So speaking of Office Canvas, just introducing what our charter is for Office Canvas, we want to ease the creation of mission-critical enterprise-class SharePoint applications by providing a set of tools for developers that reduce the development effort by at least 50%. We also want to provide feature-rich sample applications that you can leverage that are really 80% of a solution. So things like the ability to control projects in a consistent manner. There's an application that is developed on Office Canvas that is 80% complete, and really all you would need to do is customize it to meet your specific needs. We also want to shorten the learning curve and risk associated with SharePoint application development projects. There's a right way to do these things, and then there's a not so right way, or quite honestly a wrong way to do these things. And Canvas expects you to follow really how the product team develops their site definitions and their SharePoint customizations. So aligning yourself with how Microsoft product team actually develops customizations is a pretty safe bet for several different reasons. One, the upgrade path. You can almost assume that the upgrade path that Microsoft will test will be the upgrade path that the previous version used. That's going to be the one that they're going to invest the most time. So if you're creating site definitions, features, list templates, you can have a higher level of confidence that those capabilities will work in future releases. We also want to ensure that all of the solutions that are created for SharePoint are predictable in their deployment process. Again, leveraging that solution framework that is, again, provided to you out of the box. All right, so let's talk about the tools specifically around each one of those capabilities for enterprise software architecture. First is the ability to create data models, and so we do have a few tools to do that. We have SharePoint. It's an easy UI, but managing the deployment, whether it's across site collections or across environments, is challenging. We also have SharePoint Designer, which is a consideration, but really in terms of modeling content types and such, it really provides no support for doing that. Now, the best approach is obviously to leverage Visual Studio or whatever tool you're most comfortable with to create these element definitions. As you can see, the structure of these content types is not necessarily logical. After you get used to it, you can derive a lot of information just from the ID of this individual content type. But again, authoring these documents is challenging. It's also error-prone because really the only time that you get to validate whether or not your content type is formatted correctly is when you actually deploy the feature. So again, there's some challenges in terms of just using straight Visual Studio. So then let's talk about how Office Canvas, specifically for data modeling, shortens or decreases the risk and shortens the time frame required to create these things. So first and foremost, we provide you with the ability to essentially go into a development SharePoint site, model all of your content types and fields in the SharePoint UI. So you can do the standard kind of out-of-the-box modeling that SharePoint provides. The UI is pretty good, and it's very functional, very consistent. And what we allow you to do is, through our Canvas Designer, is actually take those content types and field definitions, meaning the XML that you would traditionally hand-carve inside of Visual Studio, for example, this chunk of XML. We actually allow you to automatically extract that from SharePoint, and we package it all up into a feature so that you can reuse that, and you get the best of both worlds in terms of ease of designing the data model, and then the eventual deployment and management of that data model through Visual Studio. We also provide a content type authoring canvas that allows you to do drag and drop authoring of content types and establish relationships between those. But again, the most effective way is to use what you're comfortable with in terms of modeling inside SharePoint, and then exporting that using the designer. So here's a screenshot of what the designer looks like. You'll notice this is the content type designer. So essentially we can see all of the columns and their data types and what group it's a part of. But also you'll notice there's this generate feature in the upper right-hand corner that essentially allows you to select content types and fields, or what we call an application definition that I'll get to in a little bit, but actually export and create the associated features for the content types that you're interested in. So again, we just ease that process of using the best tool for the job and then exporting that information. So with respect to workflows, SharePoint provides you with the ability to create workflows. Obviously, to do it with zero code or zero interaction, you basically work with SharePoint out-of-the-box workflows, the approval workflows, the collect comments workflow, so the various out-of-the-box workflows that you can work with. Now with Designer, you can actually do a lot of really interesting, very creative workflow applications. The one challenge with the Designer workflows is that without using some kind of crazy GUID type hack, you really can't deploy these. So the expectation here is that you're working inside of your production environment and you're managing that workflow directly in the production environment. Now that works for very pointed solutions, departmental, kind of get it together very quick solutions. But where it doesn't work is when you want predictability and repeatability across any environment, across all of your environments, across all of your customers in a consistent manner. So with respect to workflows in VisualStudio.net, if anybody has experience doing that, it does provide a series of challenges. I think there's a lot of stuff available in the public domain to make some of this easier, but just knowing about correlation tokens and all of the ins and outs and idiosyncrasies of SharePoint or Visual Studio-based workflows is extremely challenging. So as it relates to workflow, what Canvas provides you with is basically 11 workflow activities that not only model very basic workflow tasks, but also some patterns like the approval pattern, or what we call a collaboration pattern, where you have a group of individuals that are actually doing a task, but the outcome of that task is actually a group decision. We also provide a WF Helper API that allows you to kick off workflows, interact with the workflow, the current running activity. And the nice thing is that these activities are, they're not, it's not use just these and you can't use anything else. You can use the full suite of SharePoint provided workflow activities in concert with our workflow activity library. And also we provide you with the ability to do versioned releases of these workflows. So using the infrastructure, we allow you, again, to have version 1.0.0.1 running and then deploy 1.0.0.1 to an in-flight production environment. And so if you've tried to do that, you probably know that there are challenges associated with that, and we've figured that out. All right, so moving on to the next section, which is around creating user interfaces. Again, SharePoint out of the box is very, very basic. There's really no customization that you can do, so it's really insufficient for creating user-centric applications. Now, within SharePoint Designer, obviously you can do custom ASPX pages. You can leverage this thing that's pretty cool called the Data View Web Part to pull in data from other lists and kind of relate that stuff. But again, if you're talking about really developing a true software application, things like versioning and the ability to deploy these things in an extremely consistent manner are very, very important. One of the things that you can do is obviously save the site as a template, but where that becomes extremely challenging is if you already have a site that was built on that template. How do you update that template? What do you do to ensure that any new capabilities that you want to deploy to in-flight applications are if that's a feasible option? Really, SharePoint Designer does not give you that capability. Now, with respect to Visual Studio, obviously you can create ASP.NET forms. There's actually a pretty rich library of controls that you can leverage. But SharePoint provides a very natural point of extension for creating custom user interfaces on top of your content types that should be leveraged. It's part of the content type definition, and it's actually something that Canvas uses heavily to override these default user interfaces. So again, Visual Studio, personal opinion, that's the best choice for creating these applications, but there are some challenges associated with that. You have a third choice in the creation of InfoPath forms, and that works perfectly fine, and I think that the types of applications that we've seen leverage InfoPath forms are ones of a single form, maybe multiple views. But you have some challenges related to how that data is actually stored within SharePoint. The most significant is that all of these documents are stored in XML, and you could view that as a plus or as a negative. Really, the negative comes when you want to report on that information. What is required to report on an XML document is that you open that document, you deconstruct it, and that becomes very time-consuming and challenging when you're trying to run reports across multiple sites, multiple site collections. It's just very difficult to open up each one of those documents, whether programmatically or otherwise, and report on that particular information. So what does Canvas provide for user interfaces? So what we provide is an extension on top the default list experience that essentially allows you to control what is viewable. It allows you to do security trimming, so show a field for a particular user and not for another user. It allows you to create relationships, very complex relationships between entities within SharePoint. It also allows you to create very enhanced workflow task forms. The default workflow interaction with SharePoint is essentially that you create what's known as a workflow task that basically just looks like a standard SharePoint task, but really it doesn't provide the information that a user would need to act on that particular workflow task. It's simply one of, it provides you with a description, who it's assigned to, a percent complete, when it's due, but it doesn't really give you any data to make a decision of whether or not to complete this particular task. So again, Canvas provides you with the ability to create very, very rich user experiences for workflow-enabled applications. We also provide you with, via the Canvas Designer, the ability to construct these views. So all of these views are actually stored in a pretty sophisticated configuration system that lives within SharePoint lists. That's part of Office Canvas. But we do provide you with a designer that allows you to lay out how these specific views will look within SharePoint. And there's a whole series of other workflow capabilities that you can do on these individual tasks. But as you become familiar with what we call CFML on the back end, you really won't need the designer to create these views. They're text-based, so you can construct these by hand. So with respect to what an example Canvas form might look like, this is just simply, instead of that default workflow task form that you would see inside of SharePoint, you would see something like this, where it actually shows you all of the artifacts that are important to the user making a decision on whether or not to complete this task, reassign it, ask for help. So here we're providing them with the budget form. We're also providing them with all of the other supporting contract information. So again, providing the user exactly what they need to make a decision is very important in any successful application. All right, so now let's talk about the services that Canvas provides for actually upgrading in-flight projects or in-flight applications, as well as provisioning. So we provided this framework that we call the Post-Provisioning Actions Framework. Basically allows you to, when a site is provisioned, do any number of activities on a particular site using an XML application files, as what we call it. So inside of these provisioning actions, you can do things like create subwebs. So imagine that you wanted to enhance, have a site definition for a team site, but you also wanted to have maybe a search center automatically created, very similar to what the collaboration portal does out of the box, but you would actually leverage the SharePoint provides you with the ability to do subwebs automatically, but we provide you with that ability as well. We also allow you to apply custom permissions. So a pretty common example, or maybe not so common, but we have had a client where they wanted to allow certain individuals the ability to create a site, but they wanted to ensure that person couldn't change, for example, the master page. And really the only way to do that, if you allow somebody to create a site, they're the owner of the site. And because of that, they can really do anything in that site. Well, what you can do is you can once that site is provisioned, you can apply custom permissions to that site that would prevent that user from doing so. So even though they initiated the provisioning process, we can ensure that they're not the site owner of that when all is said and done. So we can also update, add, update, and delete list data. So any data that you need to make sure is initialized inside of your site or updated as part of an upgrade process, we give you some actions to do that. Also, the controlling of the top nav, the right nav. A very common challenge in SharePoint is when you want to have common navigation across multiple site collections. You could create your own navigation provider, or you could use the post-provisioning actions to ensure that the top nav is always consistent across any site that gets provisioned. And that's really what the primary purpose of that is. Also, the ability to create workflows and associations to content types, again, using decisions based on runtime, not necessarily at design time. So again, some actions that we provide to you that can be executed when a site is provisioned. So with respect to some of our governance capabilities, if you're not aware, content types and lists and all these nice data models exist at what's known as the site collection level. Well, in very large deployments, you want to consider the creation of multiple site collections simply for elevating the scalability of your application. So the challenge becomes, well, how do we ensure that all these content types and these data structures are available across all of these site collections? So what we have is we have a capability to automatically propagate not only the content types in the fields, but also the security for a particular site collection. So essentially what you have is you have a root site collection that is the authoritative site for security and content types, and through a timed job, those changes will be propagated to any what we call governed site collections. So again, we can push out changes to any number of site collections. And again, this is all something that is natural and out-of-the-box capability of Canvas. So just to again, reintroduce the need for these post-provisioning actions. So going back to kind of the default experience that a user would see if given the authority to create a site would be one of the basic, create new web user interface in SharePoint, where it essentially asks you for a title, it asks you for a URL of all things, it asks you what template you're interested in. And that's all fine and good for IT-related kind of technical people, but when you're talking to actual business users, really, they don't care about creating a site. What they care about would be something like initiating a project. That's what's most important to them. And so that's really where you start to get into this custom provisioning or custom site creation capability. So in this example, on the left-hand side, specific users with administrative capabilities are given the authority to initiate a project. Now, behind the scenes, instead of that kind of standard site creation page, we're actually asking them specific questions about what is relevant to this project. Now, you'll also notice things like who the project manager is or who the project director is. Now, these are all things that become very important and in line with the post-provisioning process, in that usually, based on this form, or at least in this example, what we needed to do is we need the ability to secure the resulting site based on the individuals that are selected here. So only the person initiating the project has access, and those folks that are actually noted here on the initiation form. And so to control that level of security out of the box it's just not there. And doing it yourself, absolutely something you can do in Visual Studio. But again, these are things that Canvas provides you for out of the box. So some other post-provisioning actions. Again, I already mentioned the ability to completely control permissions, but we also give you the ability to dynamically create lists based on list templates. We allow you to create lookups, which is something that you cannot do using even Visual Studio. You have to write code to do this. Also, again, controlling the navigation and what data is in those individual sites. We allow you to create folder structures inside of document libraries, provision subwebs, and all those good things. And also, the post-provisioning process is also responsible for ensuring that you meet SharePoint scalability requirements. And so we have a throttling capability that you can basically state that you want, for example, 1,000 subwebs in any given site collection, and if you hit that threshold, it'll go out and provision a new site collection for you and start provisioning webs in that particular site collection. So again, it's very much in line with meeting the limitations of SharePoint scalability and making sure that we never hit those limitations. This holds true for items in a list as well. So we can control how those items are stored within a list, so you never really hit that 2,000 item limit. So again, just to summarize the features that help you that are provided by Canvas. One, we provide data modeling tools and acceleration in the creation of completely deployable data models for SharePoint. We also provide you with user interface services, again, the ability to create very complex views that are not just based on a single item in a list, but many different items. We also provide you with reporting capability via SQL reporting services that I actually did not touch on. We provide this in two capabilities. One is actually in a reporting services data extension that allows you to write basically these things called camel queries against SharePoint data and leverage it right within Visual Studio and create reports from there. We also provide a SQL CLR function that essentially allows you to create views in dynamic SQL that will take the information that's stored in this all-user data table and kind of deconstruct it into a normalized fashion so that you can actually create reports based on views that have nice column names as opposed to, you know, very abstract nvarchar1, nvarchar2, which is how data is stored within SharePoint. We also provide workflow service enhancements. So again, the library of reusable activities, the API into interacting with the SharePoint workflow host, and then finally the provisioning services for advanced governance. So really controlling when a site's created, the actions that need to be performed on that. And so this particular slide just rates the various tools that you have against the enterprise software architecture type attributes. So on the left-hand side, you can see the attribute of versioning, deployment, the ability to upgrade, the ability to configure, and then the last one is actually the complexity involved in doing so. So if you look at SharePoint, you can see that just SharePoint is, you know, a tool to create these apps. You can see that it's, in terms of its complexity is very, very low, and the ability to configure these solutions is very, very high. But around all of the other supporting capabilities, its ability to do that is very, very low. Moving on to SharePoint Designer, we see that the ability to do configuration, again, is very high, both in the user interface and in workflow. The complexity is very low. Not necessarily that a business user will use it, but, you know, an IT professional type person will use it. But around the modeling of data and deploying and versioning, it rates very, very weak. Now, in Visual Studio is actually where you start to get the most green in terms of its capability and its ability to create enterprise applications. And really the only knock against it is in the complexity to create these types of solutions. Also in upgrading, you can absolutely create solutions that are upgradable. You just have to do it yourself. The areas that it's not so strong in is providing SharePoint with a framework by which to configure applications as opposed to constructing them from the ground up. And so this is really where Office Canvas comes in. It's really all about making Visual Studio in the green, essentially, on every aspect. So in its ability to upgrade solutions, its ease of use, the complexity goes down. It's not, this green in this section is not, let's just say, as green as SharePoint Designer, for example, but it definitely reduces the amount of effort and complexity in creating these, mostly by allowing you to export just a ton of information from SharePoint and reuse those and repurpose those ultimately inside of SharePoint solutions. So again, I hope this demonstrates exactly where Canvas provides value and how it's going to reduce your development efforts for these applications. So getting back into another component of Canvas is this concept of these sample applications. Again, these are those applications that are 80% complete, and in some situations they're 100% complete. But we have sample applications around project control, around human resource onboarding, around the ability to control marketing content and the publication of that content. We also have some medical records imaging workflows that we provide. So again, these are sample applications, one that you can take and leverage, or two, just use right out of the box. And the goal here is to really provide an instant return on your initial Canvas investment. So some of the scenarios that we'll talk about, and I'll fly through these so that we can start to answer some questions. But again, here are just a small subset of some of the applications that we've created on Canvas around recruiting management, meaning the ability to track interviews and candidates and job postings, the ability to track within an organization. You might have initiatives to collect information or collect ideas from users. We have a complete idea management application. Also, the richest of these applications is probably found in the project compliance and collaboration. It's really all about ensuring that an organization goes through a very consistent process for tracking contracts, tracking budgets, tracking change orders, ensuring that they go through the appropriate approval processes, all with a sight on compliance, really around Sarbanes-Oxley. That's not to say that it's a Sarbanes-Oxley tool, but of which we have one, but this is not the one. But really, it's all about auditing and accountability for all of these financially significant documents. Again, I mentioned the records management capability, and also the ability to do contract assembly is another one of those scenarios. So here's a little bit more information on the recruiting management. Again, the challenge was resume management, candidate tracking, interview coordination, and feedback management. And so the solution was a dedicated SharePoint collaboration space, or an enterprise app that leveraged Canvas for things like its roll-up web part capability and its complex data views and its reporting. So all of these individuals were interacting with this particular system. Just a couple sample screenshots of the application itself. Again, it's an application that leverages the BDC to pull in data from external systems. So here's that idea management solution that we were talking about. So essentially you have an idea catalyst or an individual that creates this thing called an idea card and attaches all kinds of supporting files. And then it goes through a pretty sophisticated workflow to ensure that it's vetted properly to make sure that the idea is something that the company should invest in. And again, the reason that Canvas made this easier is really around the ability to create the workflow to manage this particular solution, as well as the intuitive user interface and the services that it provides. Again, just a couple screenshots of the application itself. The next is records medical management. I won't drill into that too much, just in the interest of time. But essentially, we allowed the customer to route medical records, identify a member, and put it into a specific SharePoint site dedicated to that individual. Back to the project compliance solution. So you can see that managers and directors and executives were all interacting with the solution. And really the challenge was in locating these key pieces of documentation, which are essentially contracts, binding contracts. Locating the correct version, locating the executed version was very challenging. There were multiple locations that this information was stored in, multiple versions, and this solution packaged it all up so that each individual project had a dedicated site. And this solution is actually being used for 15,000 active projects, obviously for a very large organization. So that actually speaks to the scalability of these solutions, and using the provisioning and the governance capabilities of Canvas allowed us to scale out very, very large. A couple of sample screenshots from this particular app. And then the last that I wanted to talk about was you do have the facility to actually extend these applications down to specifically the Office suite of applications. So in this example, we created a contract assembly solution, or really a document assembly solution, that allows you to leverage fragments of content across multiple documents, all stored within SharePoint, all versioned and controlled by the necessary resources. Okay, so in summary, what does Office Canvas provide? Really, it allows you to create these enterprise SharePoint applications. That's not to say that you can't go into Visual Studio and create them yourselves, but we've learned a lot since the beta releases of SharePoint. And all of that knowledge that we've gained is available to you in Office Canvas, whether it's scalability, whether it's those post-provisioning actions, the ability to create content types, and all those, the right way of doing things. Again, it just decreases the amount of effort that you need to go through to really create sophisticated enterprise-class applications. So again, we provide data modeling tools around content types and the generation of that. We allow you to do the multi-relational complex user interfaces. We provide you with workflow activities that help the Visual Studio authoring process, significantly decreases the time. We also provide you that post-provisioning framework that allows you to control what a site actually, how a site functions after it's been provisioned. And we also solve the limitation of lists, web, subwebs, site collection scalability within SharePoint itself. So we've solved one of the major challenges with scalability in terms of SharePoint applications. So with that, I am going to just put up the final slide, which is our call to action. The first call to action that we have really is start building these SharePoint applications. Whether you do it based on Canvas or otherwise, this is really where those that have adopted SharePoint get the most value. So collaboration is fantastic, intranets are fantastic, but mission-critical applications on the SharePoint platform that leverage its services are the ones that provide the most value to an organization. So get building these applications. It's really the direction that SharePoint's going. Also, see if Canvas is the right fit for you. So I've provided a link to going out and checking out some of the basic information about Canvas. But most importantly, a local Neudesic account manager will actually reach out to you sometime this week. And if you're interested in contacting us immediately, my partner here, Brett Fisher, has provided with his email address and phone number, so you can reach out directly to him. So I'm going to keep that slide up during the question and answer section. I'll go ahead and just drill in and see what kind of questions we have. Okay, so can I modify my applications built using your development accelerator directly from SharePoint, or do I always have to use Canvas? The answer is you can absolutely manipulate them directly from within SharePoint. Obviously, the preferred mechanism is to go through, a real software development process where you're working in dev, you're testing and staging, and you're deploying to production. But you can make significant configuration changes right from within SharePoint. Okay, so we've got a question on the cost, and I am going to turn this over to Brett to go ahead and cover the specifics on the pricing.
Okay, thanks very much, Jason. So on many of our larger projects that we do that are $250,000 to a couple $1 million, we leave this development accelerator behind as I guess just once the project is complete, and we leave it by the developer. The cost of the product to purchase it outright, or of the development accelerator, is $7,000, and it's a per developer cost. And
actually, let me just make one correction. The $7,000 is the server-based. If you want to use the Canvas Designer, there is an additional seat license on that, but the $7,000 is really all that you need to get up and running and leveraging the developer tools.
Right. Thanks, Jason. And then the cost of the accelerators is $2,000 each. And like Jason shared, those are 80% complete solutions. And then there is a kind of similar to normal products. There's an software assurance type model in which you can pay ahead for updates. Our average updates are about 3 per year, which is both for our designer tool as well as for each of the accelerators.
Perfect. Thanks, Brett. And I think the next question was around, could you talk about pricing for Office Canvas. I think Brett did a great job at answering that. So that is the list of questions. Also, actually, there was one, is there a VPC that has Office Canvas installed on it? That's actually not something that's publicly available. But again, if you have a level of interest and you'd like to investigate Canvas, absolutely either reach out to Brett or when your AAM follows up with you, go ahead and ask them more. And we'll be happy to come out and demonstrate and actually show you, working solutions built on Canvas. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to our moderator. Let's see. One question did come in. Let me just see. Constantine raised her hand. How can I test drive your product? Okay, so go ahead. When the account manager reaches out to you, we can set up whether it's a demonstration or an on-site POC type of an environment. So go ahead and when the AM gets in contact with you, go ahead and just voice that interest. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator to go ahead and close us out.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you all for joining us. This concludes our program. You may now disconnect from the audio and meeting portions of this event.